Sonic go fast, Sonic go far, but what if Sonic couldn't go up? In other words, what if you couldn't jump in Sonic Adventure 2? If you don't know, this is a follow-up to my previous videos about Sonic Adventure 1. In this video, we'll just look at the hero story with the other two coming later. Also, I should preface that I actually tackled this challenge by myself, but in the ample amount of time between recording initial footage and finally making this script, I was actually contacted by Sonic Speedrunner Dawn, who actually published their own video that featured this exact same challenge. They offered to help me with my video, so we'll focus on the routes I stumbled upon, with a number of optimizations found by Dawn, with even a couple of the speedrun strats explained by him. Sonic's first stage, City Escape, is fairly straightforward. The initial boarding section can be done without jumping or potentially even touching the analog stick. Heading along the level, we don't have too many obstacles. There is this part where you'd usually have to grab a pulley, but using the previous ramp to access some springs lets you bypass that. This section with a bottomless pit and some hexagonal moving platforms is tricky. We can't just dash through, but I did manage to get through by spin dashing off these stairs, homing attacking a bot, then using another bot's attack to damage boost us up to here, from which we can then just dash across and continue onwards. We could then run away from the truck all the way to the goal ring, but there's an issue. If we land next to the goal ring, we're just short enough that we can't actually touch it without jumping. As such, I had to redo the whole prior section until I was able to carefully roll along the wall and fly directly into the ring. After that, we have our first boss fight against the F6 Bigfoot mech. This feels fairly reminiscent of the Chaos fights from the previous game in that it's a big circular arena, and the game expects you to jump and homing attack to deal damage. As such, there's not a lot that you could do here, but when I run out of options during these challenges, I have a tendency to try to just sort of throw myself at the problem because sometimes that helps, and here it actually worked. If you spin dash directly into it while holding forward, the game will just sort of force Sonic upwards, enough to actually deal damage without jumping. I was worried this was a fluke, but I was able to do this repeatedly, making this boss jumpless. Hell yeah. Afterwards, we have our first level with Knuckles. Much like in Sonic Adventure 1, his levels have you running, climbing, and gliding around in search of Chaos Shards. This time around, he has an uppercut attack at the end of his 3-hit combo that lets him gain air literally anywhere, as well as a spinning attack that gets him even higher, all without pressing the A button, so this is totally allowed. Also, like in the first game, you get 3 randomly assigned shards, and you can always reset and get a different set of them whenever you want, so there's really not much that is blocking our way here. So every one of his levels are actually doable jumpless. As such, I won't explain all of his levels beat by beat, but I will touch on specific elements that might be tricky. Onwards, following a very simple fight against Eggman, we have the very first Tails level. Unlike the Red and Blue Boys, his gameplay is entirely different from his Sonic Adventure 1 counterpart. Rather than running around at the speed of ground and occasionally flying with his tails, you instead clunk around in his plane turned into a mech, while shooting at stuff using the gun gameplay introduced with Gamma. While we do get a hover ability later, we will be jumping quite often regardless. This first jump is to clear a small ledge after the first elevator, and the second is much the same. Despite there being enemies nearby, close behind us, they won't shoot, so we can't damage boost there. Fortunately, the mech ahead does shoot, so Dawn was able to hop onto the yellow gas tank and then get damage boosted up, while I originally used 2 jumps. In the room after the checkpoint, you can use the damage boost or just sort of walk up the ledge, either works. Then we have to jump onto the diagonal elevator because somehow this ledge isn't as forgiving as the previous. Afterwards, the next obstacle is another innocuous ledge. I originally thought a jump was required, but Dawn found that you can simply walk across the gap by going at the right angle. From there, it's 3 more jumps to the goal ring. I originally took 10 jumps for this level, but Dawn's improvements brings it down to 7. Next up, we have Metal Harbor, where we immediately run into a rough spot. The game expects us to jump and then chain homing attacks to the next part, which houses a pulley that takes us up to the light speed upgrade, which would let us dash through rings. While messing around, I accidentally stumbled upon a bit of tech that is new to me, but well known to speedrunners, where you can actually convert horizontal momentum to vertical momentum by spin dashing in certain situations. The thing is, a normal mock bounce would only get me over to the next platform. Through more experimentation, I realized that I could line up against this barrier, dash, and sometimes the game would then put Sonic directly on top of the barrier. I don't know why, but it just works. Afterwards, I could dash onto the pulley and then use a single jump to get off of it to reach the upgrade. But it turns out, you can get even more height with the Mach Bounce by also using Sonic's hover frames. Much like in Sonic Adventure 1, you can press A at any point to give Sonic a jump's worth of airtime without actually jumping. When done properly, you can combine this with a Mach Bounce to get over to the upgrade without needing to jump. Afterwards, the rest of the level can be done mostly as intended, though 1 or 2 cheeky Mach Bounces are required to avoid jumps involving pulleys. Right after, we have a fight, which it feels like a classic Sonic Adventure fight. No jumps needed, you just roll into the enemy until they die. In the following cutscene, Eggman decides to blow up the island, so we have to race to the finish before the timer counts down. Spoiler, the timer doesn't actually matter that much, even when going slower during this challenge. So this level has a lot of hold forward and run kind of sections, which obviously don't require much thought or any jumps. About 30 seconds in, we find our first vine swing, which will always throw Sonic off automatically at the end of its path, so we don't have to jump. When we get to this point with a mech ambush, we actually need to stop, turn around, and dash across to get the Ancient Light power-up. I legitimately forgot about this during my initial playthrough of this challenge, which sucks because it is actually useful later on. Next, we get to this point where the game presents floating blocks that we could jump across, but instead, dashing forward to the right gets us to a line of rings that leads to a very helpful spring, skipping all that platforming. Continuing onwards, we come to the biggest obstacle in this entire forest, a giant tree. There are a series of springs that take you up this part, where there is a mech on a platform with a drone nearby. I initially thought I could get past by somehow starting a homing attack chain, which would then let me attack the drone and then homing attack the spring. Unfortunately, I just couldn't get this to work. While writing this section, I went back to test a theory. In the first video, I occasionally used a strat where I would initiate a light speed dash attack and then cancel it mid-air to give Sonic some extra height. After a bunch of attempts using save states, I was able to Ancient Light cancel my way to the spring. It doesn't look that flashy, but this is a huge achievement, because it means that I can skip a jump I previously thought required. Then again, you could also skip this in a much cooler way, using a neat speedrun trick that I'll let Dawn explain himself.
The speedrunning trick Green Forest Wall Run is made possible by the Loop Speed mechanic in Sonic Adventure 2. Loop Speed gives Sonic special physics that raises Sonic's speed and allows him to run on walls. Speedrunners use this mechanic by touching the back of the loop and flinging Sonic towards the tree with a homing attack. If done properly, you land on the tree, running all the way up to the top, and spin dash to the end of the section. In the minimum jumps challenge, it is even more difficult than normal, as you need to get to the correct point of the loop without jumping. What I did here is spin dash from the other side of the loop and homing attack, trying to land at the correct spot and then hit the skip.
Afterwards, running and some springs lead to a bungee jump which, thankfully, throws Sonic off automatically. The last bit of the level features a bunch of platforms that fall into the water at different rates. If you're quick enough, you can go up to this fallen log, then dash forward, giving you enough height to reach one of the springs, leading directly to the goal ring for a jumpless forest escape. Afterwards, Pumpkin Hill is a lot like Knuckles' Red Canyon, lots of space to glide around and plenty of places to climb and dismount. Also, if you fall down, you'll get caught by the floor of air, so it's super easy. Mission Street is when Tails' gameplay starts to get a bit interesting because early on we can actually get the booster upgrade, which gives him a bit of extra mobility through the air. It starts as normal, running along and then picking up the booster. Next, an intentional death or restart via the menu puts you back at the start, but with the booster still collected. This lets you hover off to the right to the first weight without needing to jump across from the upgrade to the weight. Then you can actually stand under the weight because when it drops and damages Tails, he actually gets popped up onto the weight. Next, we naturally want to jump onto the pulley, but there is something neat. On Dawn's video upload, commenter Eli Bonham suggested to damage boost off of the pulley. This can be a bit tricky because you need to time the shot so that it follows Tails up and hits him from behind/below, but it works. From there, you can slowly make your way up the hexagonal platforms and then hop up to the checkpoint. From there, running all the way down and activating the missile clears the way, but we don't want to jump. Instead, we actually drop down and hover forwards to a spring that just exists, which pops you back up on the other side. One huge improvement over my original route is to drop down here and utilize a ramp next to an ancient ruin that propels you to the next part, saving at least 2 jumps. And then another improvement, I originally thought you had to jump at least twice to get across this gap with the 2 weights. Dawn's strategy instead is to run up and then hover down to hit this button, locking the weights in place. Then do a really cool trick where you shoot towards a health pack, balloon off in distance as you start hovering, which in this case pops them up through the floor. Hovering and using some elevators then gets you to the next checkpoint. If you run and platform across like I originally did, it takes like 2 jumps, but instead you could simply jump and hover across, skipping a jump. All in all, that means that Dawn's route through Mission Street with the little optimization suggested by Eli requires just 3 jumps. A nice improvement over my original best of 9. The accurately named Aquatic Mine is the least accessible Knuckles level in the game, as water normally requires a jump to get out of. Thankfully, on every level you can find a spring to bounce you up out of the water, so you don't have to jump. Also, while difficult, it is possible to spin attack and climb up to the highest room, so the level is jumpless if a bit hazardous. In this episode of Burnout Paradise, we travel along a nonsensical strip of highway to catch up to the president. It's easy, jumpless, and actually sort of fun. Right after, we have the opposite of fun. Hidden Base has a lot of pulleys, platforming, and pitfalls. Disappointingly, my original run through this level resulted in a staggering 47 jumps. Yet again, Dawn's run proved that much less is actually required. One of the biggest factors is the hover jump. It's a neat exploit where you double tap the A button very quickly. This greatly increases your jump height, letting you cover more ground, and also pause buffering makes this more consistent, which is what you'll often see. You can actually combine this with the upwards momentum that jumping off of certain pulleys gives you for an even bigger leap. I guess it's also important to mention that the path you take also matters. All that said, here's a quick rundown of all the jumps. Now, we have an important level for Sonic, as Pyramid Cave is home to the Bounce Bracelet upgrade. Getting to it is its own challenge. Initially, I thought this meant that some regrettable jumps were required, because how else are you supposed to get past these sections without jumping? Turns out the answer is mock bounces. Only issue is that performing a mock bounce with these ledges is really annoying because while it looks like a slope, the game has like a weird invisible wall sometimes, so you usually can't use the slope as a slope, but sometimes it works, and once you do, you can get on top of the ledge and then simply dash across for a very reliable mock bounce. At the start, this lets you skip the pulley, and then you can dash and use hover frame to land in this corner, which basically always gives you a mock bounce for some reason. Onwards, it's some simple running to the location of the upgrade, but it's atop a ledge where I'm pretty sure you could use a mock bounce on a nearby slope, but I didn't get it to work. Instead, I managed to do an Ancient Light cancel near the robo to let Sonic grab the ledge and pull himself up. From here, we can now bounce whenever we're in the air in a ball form by pressing B. Certain actions like hitting the hourglass switch will knock Sonic out of the ball form, so we have to work around this to get through the door ahead. The next obstacle is this metal door, where the game expects you to travel all the way down and to the right, grab a key and bring it back, and drop it onto the platform. Since you can't throw objects very high or mock bounce while holding an object, this required a number of jumps when I did it. Instead, surprise, we can utilize a speedrun skip. You can actually roll and jump through the minuscule gap between the wall and the door because it just works. It is possible to clip through the door without jumping, which is what I eventually managed to do, but it's much less consistent. It took me 4 or so minutes of attempts while using save states. Everything afterwards can be done without jumping using the same tricks we looked at previously, meaning that this level is doable jumpless when I originally took 12 jumps. If I'm being honest, initially Pyramid Cave was so frustrating for me that I ended up visiting the Chow Garden to cheer me up, but instead we'll visit it and consider this a bit of a reward for improving. Now, this is probably Knuckles' hardest level for this challenge. Don't get me wrong, it's still doable without jumping, but There are a few spots where you have to hit a switch and then quickly navigate through a rapidly closing door. If you mess up your movement, it could get annoying. Also, if you fall into this small bed of water, I think in the blue area, you're forced to restart because there's no way out of that water without jumping. Afterwards, we have Knuckles' first boss fight, which is challenging for the same reason: movement. Whenever the skylights are opened, you have to quickly navigate over to King Boom Boo's shadow and dig. On the floor, this is easier because you can stop moving, press, I think it's Y, to swap the action, and then press B to dig. On the wall, he can easily outpace you, so there's not a lot of room for mistakes. Regardless, I was able to do this without jumping. Next up is another boss fight, this one pitting Sonic against the Egg Golem. Going into this, I had a feeling that our bounce bracelet would be key. One of Golem's attacks can lower sections on the walkway, which we can then use to initiate a bounce. This strategy proved too difficult, so I eventually just sort of started slamming my head against the problem and spin dashing all over the place, and I accidentally performed a super bounce. Turns out this is another known speedrun trick called a profit bounce, named for the speedrunner who originated the setup, which works fairly consistently. To simplify things, because this isn't a tutorial, you basically just line up Sonic using the lines on the ground and his feet, spin dash and hold up. When you do it right, this works pretty much every time, making the boss doable without jumping. Following the natural progression of city to the ocean, to the deserts and the forest, we're now in space. This level is annoying because if played all the way through, which is what I initially did, it requires a bunch of jumps. There are springs and pulleys that require jumps, platforming across flat areas that need jumps, that sort of thing. While a few may have been avoidable, Eternal Engine originally took me 20 jumps. Turns out, there's a skip near the first checkpoint that eliminates 16 of those. So, said skip involves running at this stack of crates and performing a jump and shoot in such a way that Tails ends up getting pushed out of bounds. There is more to this trick, but that's how it works. Then, you hover forward for about a minute or so before falling down onto the goal ring, which, after some save states and attempts, I was able to do, so nice. For Knuckles' last proper level, he has to gather some shards in Meteor Herd. This has more verticality than the rest, but since there is no fall damage and plenty of rockets to give you height, this doesn't pose much of a challenge at all. As for his fight against Rouge, it's challenging. As in, Rouge is really challenging my patience. She loves to jump, fly around, and dive bomb directly onto us. Without actual jumps, it's hard to chase her down, but we can still eventually beat her. So it's annoying, but jumpless. Then we return to the space station for Crazy Gadget. Right near the start, we have our first gravity switch up on a ledge protected by an artificial chaos. While I thought that a jump was required, as there was no other way to gain air or initiate a bounce, you can use an Ancient Light Cancel to get Sonic up onto the ledge. Then, after switching the gravity, we can spin dash off the side to start bouncing and then just barely bounce through the door. This skips having used two different pulleys, though getting to the checkpoints and through the tunnel thing was a bit annoying. Onwards, a number of bounces gets us to this yellowy room with switches that changes gravity either to the left, right, or down. The route I took was basically the normal one where you switch gravity to the left, then back across to a rail that takes us to the next section. However, you could also perform a really cool speedrun trick that I'll again let Dawn explain.
Crazy Gadget Skip Skip is one of the most daunting skips in the game. It's done by spin dash hovering off into the void and weaving Sonic through this small gap in kill planes. You are then able to navigate Sonic all the way to the end of the stage while out of bounds. If done well, you'll have just enough distance to reach the goal ring. The normal version of this skip requires a spin dash jump, but if we spin dash onto this ledge, we can make our way onto the box, giving us just enough height to use a spin dash hover instead. There are also older versions of the skip, however we decided not to go with them, as this requires jumping across this void to get to the other area and navigate the stage on its side. If these skips are interesting to you, feel free to check out my channel at DawnSR, as I'll be releasing a video about the speedrunning history of Crazy Gadget and its skips.
Since I didn't know about this, I kept heading forward as best I could. After bouncing, then homing attacking across, it's important to initiate another bounce so that we can break open the pneumatic delivery system, like they have at a bank. Otherwise, it's sort of a soft lock. Even more bounces eventually gets us to the rainbow platform puzzle room. Even when played normally, this is very annoying. We have to navigate to a switch to arm the missile launcher at the end, which can then blow up the gates blocking the goal ring. I'm not sure if we could do this without jumping by following the normal routes, but thankfully, it's still possible if we get a bit creative. After changing gravity upwards, I dashed off the purple platform and then homing attacked back to just barely land on the red one. Now we're basically already at the end. We can then swap gravity back downwards and simply roll and start a bounce along the side of the purple platform, where we could hit the switch to arm the missile. Afterwards, I landed on the side of the switch and performed a very careful spin dash to get to the final platform, meaning that Crazy Gadget is actually possible jumpless when you play through it all the way through. It feels pretty good. Then, much like Tails vs. Eggman earlier, it's another simple and jumpless fight. In the first one we had Final Egg, now we have Final Rush for our final action stage, at least for the hero story. Even when played normally, this is an exceedingly long level that offers plenty of opportunities to plummet to a fiery death. For the challenge, you could do a speedrun skip directly to the very end by abusing the game's physics. I, however, didn't do that because I, metaphorically, slammed my head into the metaphorical wall until I literally beat the level without jumping. I was really proud of it, and while it could all be skipped, I want to show it off. I do abuse the physics at one point to skip past an otherwise unskippable rail switch. Otherwise, there's really no new strategies, it's just a lot of tedious stuff. So sit back and enjoy a montage that I spliced together to show all of the dumb stuff I had to do to beat this level jumpless. Enjoy!
This city sure has some steep hills. Barely made it.
We finish off the challenge with a boss fight against Shadow that's actually interesting. It's crazy. So, it seems pretty simple. You have to run along a technically endless track while trying to beat up Shadow. We gotta keep moving because the track is constantly falling apart section by section. If we get ahead of him, he'll either home attack us from behind, which you can't do much to, or teleport forward. If he gets ahead of us far enough, he'll actually use Chaos Control to send out some crazy yellow energy bolts that home in on us. While deadly, this move proved to be his downfall because I realized that we can actually bait him into using it and then dash forward with the right timing, while also making sure we don't get caught on a falling platform. You'll always hit him before he can react, so this is doable without jumping. Huzzah. So, that means that this whole challenge takes this many jumps.
46.
Excellent. I am really happy with how this run turned out. Big thanks to Dawn SR for helping with this video. Be sure to check out his video and channel as a way to say thanks. Speaking of, big thanks to my channel members for their support, with a space station size thanks to Captain Crayfish for being a super fan. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, maybe subscribe. I got other Sonic videos. If you haven't seen them, I try not to jump. I have other challenge videos on other games. And yeah, you get the idea. That's about it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.